Charles, a successful businessman in his 60s, embodies hard work and perseverance. Coming from a modest background, he built his empire from scratch, climbing the ladder with unyielding determination. Every brick of his company symbolizes his commitment, sacrifices, and vision. He dedicated his entire life to nurturing his family business, hoping that one day his only son, Antoine, would take over with the same passion and integrity. Charles saw Antoine as his natural heir and, over the years, instilled in him the values of honest work, loyalty, and patience, in the hope that he would carry on the legacy. However, Antoine, though brilliant and promising, secretly harbored vastly different ambitions. Young, power-hungry, and eager to taste fortune and influence, he struggled to grasp his father's lessons. Instead of being inspired by Charles's success, Antoine developed an urgent desire to surpass it quickly, ignoring the fundamental principles behind it. Impatient to take his turn, Antoine grew frustrated, convinced that he was ready to lead the empire in his own way. Over time, tensions arose between father and son, with Antoine believing that Charles was clinging too long to the reins of the company. Charles, on the other hand, remained convinced that Antoine had much to learn before assuming such responsibilities. This silent disagreement pushed Antoine to make a radical decision. He secretly struck a deal with the company's main competitors. This covert arrangement aimed to destabilize his father and force him to relinquish control sooner than expected. Certain of his ability to manipulate events in his favor, Antoine betrayed not only his father's trust, but also the legacy Charles had spent decades building. Blinded by paternal love and the belief that his son would eventually follow the path he had laid out, Charles was unaware of the scheme brewing in the shadows. Yet, signs began to emerge. Longtime clients became hesitant, formerly reliable partners suddenly grew wary, and rumors of a buyout circulated. Vigilant but unwilling to believe that his own son could be behind the turmoil, Charles started to question the situation. He found himself at a crossroads. Should he confront Antoine and risk breaking their relationship, or give him the benefit of the doubt and risk losing everything? Charles ultimately uncovered Antoine's betrayal in an unexpected way. While reviewing financial documents to understand the recent anomalies in the company, he found clues that directly linked to Antoine's machinations. The pain of this discovery was far deeper than Charles had anticipated. It was not just a professional betrayal, but a deeply personal one from the person he had pinned all his hopes on for the future of the family empire. The revelation left him filled with a profound bitterness, a mix of sadness, disappointment, and anger. But instead of reacting impulsively, as Antoine might have hoped, Charles made a calculated choice. Understanding his son's impatient nature, Charles decided to play the long game. Rather than confronting Antoine immediately, he suppressed his anger and masked his emotions behind the facade of a loving father. He continued working alongside him as if nothing had happened, observing, listening, and analyzing his son's every move. Charles knew that to strike where it would hurt the most, he had to wait for the perfect moment, when Antoine was most vulnerable and confident of his victory. During this period, Charles's health began to decline. Years of relentless work, unending responsibilities, and now his son's betrayal weighed heavily on him. Though physically weakened, his mind remained sharp. Antoine, misinterpreting his father's failing health as evidence that his plan was succeeding, became even more assured. Believing that Charles had not discovered his scheme, Antoine continued his double game, presenting himself as the devoted son. He brought flowers to his father's hospital room, visited him regularly, and ensured he lacked nothing, all with a hypocritical smile. This duplicity became routine for Antoine, who envisioned himself at the helm of the empire, enjoying the recognition and power that came with it. His ambitions grew, and he began making secret promises to his new allies while increasing his influence among shareholders and key partners. Antoine started positioning himself as a visionary leader, ready to reshape the company and erase his father's legacy. What Antoine didn't realize was that Charles was quietly planning his own intricate and devastating counterattack. Despite his physical frailty, Charles used his deep understanding of the business world to prepare a strategy far more cunning than anything Antoine could have imagined. He discreetly forged alliances with loyal former partners, secured airtight legal contracts, and reinforced his control over aspects of the company that Antoine was unaware of, all in secret, unnoticed by his overconfident son. The fateful day arrived with the reading of Charles's will after his death. Antoine entered the notary's office with a mix of assurance and impatience, certain that this was the culmination of his ambitions. He was confident that he would inherit the family empire and finally assume the power and wealth he had long desired. But as the notary began reading the will, a growing sense of unease filled the room. The words did not align with what Antoine had expected. As the details unfolded, Antoine's confidence turned to horror as he realized the full extent of his father's posthumous revenge. Charles, with meticulous precision and unwavering calm, had orchestrated an outcome that would leave Antoine forever marked. Rather than bequeath the family empire to his son, Charles decided to leave his entire fortune, the work of his lifetime, to a cause close to his heart, a charitable foundation dedicated to supporting young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, those who, like him in his youth, lacked the resources and support to start their own ventures. With a visionary spirit and a touch of cruel irony, Charles chose to dedicate his legacy to those who, unlike his own son, would truly appreciate the value of hard work, resilience, and perseverance. Antoine, frozen in his chair, could not hide his shock. His dreams of wealth and power crumbled in an instant. But Charles's revenge did not stop there. The notary continued reading, and Antoine discovered with growing dismay that not only was he disinherited, but he had also inherited the debts his father had incurred in his final days. These debts, which Charles had deliberately accumulated as part of his final strategy, were now solely Antoine's responsibility. The debts were far from symbolic, they were colossal. They stemmed from loans and risky investments made by Charles shortly before his death, ventures that were never meant to succeed. Antoine, who had envisioned inheriting a flourishing empire, suddenly found himself burdened with a mountain of debt and no immediate means to address it. The family business, now under the control of the foundation, was entirely out of his reach. Charles's vengeance was not merely about disinheriting Antoine. It was about leaving him with a financial burden so overwhelming it would crush him under its weight. It was a masterful double blow, meticulously orchestrated by a man who, even weakened by illness, had stayed one step ahead of his son. At the end of the reading, in this moment of utter despair, the notary revealed one final message left by Charles for Antoine. As silence filled the room, the simple but devastating words struck like a hammer blow. You could have had it all by staying loyal to me. Now, you will reap what you have sown. These words, brief yet laden with meaning, hit Antoine at his very core. They resounded as an ultimate lesson, a harsh truth Charles had waited patiently to deliver. Had Antoine remained loyal, had he learned the lessons his father tried to teach him, he could have inherited not just the fortune but also the respect and wisdom necessary to lead the family empire. Instead, his greed and betrayal had led to his downfall. This cruel reminder, delivered with such precision and finality, was the ultimate coup de grace. Antoine realized, too late, that everything he desired had been within his grasp. His impatience had blinded him, driving him to sacrifice everything for a quick gain, without understanding that his father had already planned to pass the business to him when the time was right. That message, that final phrase from Charles, was more than a punishment. It was a mirror held up to Antoine, reflecting his own mistakes and weaknesses. Stunned, Antoine rose from his chair, unable to speak. Everything he had schemed for, everything for which he had betrayed his own father, had collapsed in an instant. His future, once so promising in his eyes, was now littered with debt and despair. The glances of the others in the room, once filled with respect and admiration, were now tinged with pity. Antoine left the office without a word, knowing that both his reputation and his professional life were in ruins. In a final act of symbolism, Charles ensured that his legacy would benefit those who truly deserved a chance, while punishing his son for his greed and treachery. Stripped of everything, Antoine was left alone to face the consequences of his actions, realizing too late that his impatience and thirst for power had been his undoing. Charles's revenge was not merely a single blow but a methodical act of destruction, devastating everything in its path. What was supposed to be the pinnacle of Antoine's ambitions, the takeover of the family business and the acquisition of immense wealth, had turned into a waking nightmare. His carefully plotted plans, woven with ambition and cunning, crumbled in an instant, like a house of cards swept away by an unrelenting storm. Antoine, who had already envisioned himself triumphant, confident in his power and intelligence, is abruptly brought back to reality. Every move Charles made was calculated, striking not just Antoine's material possessions, but also his reputation, his honor, and the arrogant pride he wore so openly. He has not only lost everything, the business, the inheritance, and what he believed was his destiny, but now faces public humiliation on a scale he could never have imagined. News of his disinheritance and the staggering debts he now owes spreads like wildfire. What was once whispered in business circles as inevitable, Antoine, the natural heir to Charles's empire, has become a topic of mockery and pity. Once celebrated for his charisma, confidence, and presumed future as a titan of industry, Antoine now finds himself rejected by those who once saw him as the next great leader in business. The company's former partners, who were once eager to shake his hand and grant him favors, now turn away from him with disdain. Shareholders, worried about their investments, focus on distancing themselves from the man now synonymous with failure and scandal. Even his secret allies, those with whom he had forged underhanded agreements in the shadows, abandon him, eager to avoid being tainted by his very public downfall. Each one seeks to protect their own interests, leaving Antoine to face the disastrous consequences of his actions alone. More painful still is how he becomes an outcast not only in business, but also in society. The prestigious salons where he was once welcomed with open arms now shut their doors. Those who once admired or feared him now relish his downfall, taking a barely concealed satisfaction in watching his descent. He becomes the laughingstock of those he once thought he would dominate, a living embodiment of the saying, "The higher you climb, the harder you fall." His name, once synonymous with power and a bright future, is now irrevocably tied to shame and failure. Even his past strategies, those clever maneuvers that had once earned him admiration and respect, are now seen as the deceptive tricks of a man too arrogant to foresee his own collapse. Antoine is no longer a promising leader or a symbol of success. He is reduced to a shadow of what he could have been, condemned to wander the circles he once sought to rule, but this time as a living cautionary tale of the price of blind ambition.